The Grand Council chamber of Unity Prime stretched nearly half a kilometer from end to end, its curved walls lined with viewing ports that displayed the swirling colors of the nebula beyond. 300 representatives from across the galaxy filled the tiered seats, each species separated by atmospheric barriers tailored to their specific needs. The insectoid Thrixians sat in their climate-controlled pods, their chittering voices translated instantly by the central computer. The aquatic Delsari floated in suspended water spheres, their luminescent bodies pulsing with agitation. Between them, in the neutral zone reserved for mediators, Ambassador Helen Garcia stood alone. She was tall for a human, with dark hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes that seemed to notice everything. Her simple gray diplomatic uniform bore only one insignia, the circular emblem of Earth. For the past 6 hours, she had listened to both sides argue about mineral rights in the Talos sector, a region of space where 3-star systems bordered both Thrixian and Delsari territory. The mining operations were established by our ancestors 4 generations ago, clicked High Counselor Thrixka, his mandibles snapping with emphasis. The Delsari have no legitimate claim to resources we have harvested for centuries. The water sphere belonging to Speaker Delzamir bubbled violently. Your ancestors stole those systems from our colonial expedition. We have documentation proving our ships arrived first. Helen raised one hand, a simple gesture that somehow commanded attention across the massive chamber. The argument stopped. Even after 150 years of human presence in the galaxy, most species still marveled at how such a physically unremarkable species could dominate a room through sheer presence. I've reviewed both sets of historical records, Helen said, her voice calm and steady. The translation systems carried her words to every species in their own language. High Counselor, your ancestors did establish mining operations 4 generations ago. Speaker, your colonial expedition did arrive in the sector first by approximately 73 years. Both facts are true. She walked slowly between the 2 opposing delegations, her footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. The question isn't who was there first. The question is, what serves both your peoples best right now, today? The Talos sector has 17 mineral-rich asteroids. Thrixian technology excels at deep core extraction. Delsari processing methods recover 30% more refined materials from raw ore than any other known technique. Helen stopped at the center of the chamber, looking between both parties. You could fight over these resources for another generation. Spend your wealth on weapons instead of prosperity. Watch your people suffer while you argue about ancient pride. Or you could partner. Share the extraction and processing. Both of you would gain more than either could achieve alone. Thrix's antennae twitched with consideration. Delsamir's bioluminescence shifted from angry red to thoughtful purple. Around the chamber, other representatives leaned forward. This was what humans did better than any species in the known galaxy. They found the path forward when everyone else saw only conflict. Across Unity Prime Station, in the medical bay of Docking Ring 7, Lieutenant Danny Cooper was having a much louder day. Alarms blared as his rescue ship, the Swift Response, prepared for emergency launch. His crew of 12 moved with practiced efficiency, though half of them weren't human. They didn't need to be. Danny had learned early in his career that courage and compassion weren't uniquely human traits, but humans seemed to inspire those qualities in others. "We've got a distress call from Aquellan Transport," announced his communications officer, a crystalline Shardian named Kreeth. "Engine failure in the Tertian asteroid field. 93 passengers, including 42 children." Danny, strapped into the pilot's seat, his fingers already dancing across the control interface. How long until their life support fails? 2 hours, maybe less. "Then we've got plenty of time," Danny said with a grin that made his crew shake their heads. They had learned that when Lieutenant Cooper said they had plenty of time, it meant they were about to do something technically impossible. The Swift Response launched from Unity Prime with a burst of acceleration that would have crushed most species. The human-designed inertial dampeners made it merely uncomfortable. Danny piloted the ship into the asteroid field with a combination of instinct and mathematics that seemed almost supernatural to his non-human crew. Rocks the size of buildings spun past their hull with meters to spare. "Sir, the optimal approach vector requires 47 minutes to navigate safely," Kreeth reported. "Good thing we're not taking the optimal approach," Danny replied, spinning the ship through a gap that his first officer's calculations said was too narrow. The hull screamed in protest, but they made it through. "We're going to get there in 20 minutes. He did it in 18. The Quellan transport tumbled helplessly through space. Its hull breached in 3 places. Danny maneuvered the Swift Response alongside with delicate precision, extending docking clamps that grabbed the damaged vessel and stabilized its spin. His crew worked like a perfectly synchronized machine, human and alien side by side, cutting through bulkheads and evacuating passengers through emergency airlocks. When a secondary explosion ripped through the transport's engine section, Danny didn't hesitate. He ran back into the damaged ship alone, searching compartments that the initial scans had missed. He found a Quellan child, no more than 5 in their years, trapped behind a collapsed beam. Danny lifted wreckage that should have been too heavy, ignoring the toxic fumes filling his lungs, and carried the child to safety. As the last Quellan stumbled aboard the swift response, the transport's reactor finally gave out. The ship exploded in a brilliant flash that lit up the asteroid field. Danny watched from the bridge, one hand resting on the shoulder of the child he'd saved. "All passengers accounted for, sir," Kreith reported. "0 casualties." "Outstanding work, everyone," Danny said. "Let's get these people home." Back on Unity Prime, in a darkened conference room far from the public chambers, 3 members of the Korthax Dominion watched footage of the rescue with expressions of disgust. The Korthax were massive beings, nearly 3 meters tall, with armored hides and strength that made them the galaxy's most feared warriors. War Leader Korthax slammed one clawed fist on the table. "This is what the galaxy celebrates. Weakness pretending to be strength. The humans risk everything for beings who contribute nothing to their own survival." "They are valued too highly in the Coalition," agreed another Korthax. "Their soft words and reckless compassion have made the galaxy dependent." "Weak. When the humans are gone, the strong will rule again, as nature intended," Korthax said. "The Coalition will remember that survival belongs to those with power, not pretty speeches." On the bridge of the swift response, Danny Cooper's personal communicator chimed with an urgent priority message. He read it twice, certain there had to be a mistake. Around Unity Prime, every human in the Coalition was receiving the same message. Earth was recalling them. All of them. Immediately. No explanation. No timeline for return. Just a single command that made no sense. "Come home now." Helen Garcia stared at the message on her personal console, reading it for the 5th time in as many minutes. The words remained the same, stark and absolute against the glowing screen. "All human citizens are hereby ordered to return to Earth immediately. No exceptions. Departure window closes in 72 hours. By order of the Unified Earth Government." Outside the small window of her quarters, Unity Prime bustled with activity as it always did. Hundreds of species going about their business, trading and talking and living together in the fragile peace that humans had helped build. In 3 days, every human would be gone from this place. The thought made her chest feel tight. A chime at her door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Vreth, the Quellan ambassador she'd been working with for the past 8 years. His 4 arms hung limply at his sides, and his usually bright orange skin had faded to a dull amber. "Tell me the message is wrong," Vreth said quietly. "Tell me humans aren't really leaving." "I wish I could, but the order comes from the highest authority on Earth. We have no choice." "There is always a choice," Vreth said, his voice rising. "The Thrixian and Delsari agreement we've been negotiating for 6 months, it falls apart without you. Do you understand that? Without human mediation, they will go to war." "Then you'll have to finish it," Helen said, though the words felt hollow. "You're a skilled diplomat, Vreth. You've watched how we work. You can do this." "Watching and doing are not the same thing." Vreth moved into her quarters, all 4 hands gesturing with agitation. "Humans have a quality we cannot replicate. You make others want to be better than they are. You inspire hope." "How do I learn that in 3 days?" Helen had no answer for him. She had been asking herself the same question since the recall order arrived. Across the station, Danny Cooper was emptying his locker in the pilot's ready room. His crew gathered around him, watching in stunned silence as he packed his few personal belongings into a standard duffel bag, the picture of his sister's family. A medal from his first successful rescue, a smooth stone from a Quellan beach where his crew had celebrated after a particularly difficult mission. "Sir, there must be some mistake," Kreith said. His crystalline form flickered with colors that Danny had learned to recognize as distress. "You cannot simply leave. We have scheduled rescue patrols for the next 6 months." "Orders are orders," Danny said, trying to keep his voice steady. "The Coalition will assign another pilot to the swift response. You'll train them, teach them everything we've developed together. It took us 5 years to become this efficient," his navigator, a tentacled Meridian named Yolosa, pointed out. 5 years of learning to anticipate each other, to trust completely. We cannot rebuild that with someone new. Danny closed the locker with more force than necessary. Then you'll have to be better teachers than I was a student. Look, I don't understand this any more than you do. But Earth is calling us home, and we have to answer. What if we need you? Kreeth asked simply. The question hit Danny harder than he expected. He looked at his crew, this strange collection of beings from different worlds who had become more than colleagues. They were his friends, his family. The thought of leaving them felt like cutting off a part of himself. You'll manage, he said finally. You're the best rescue crew in the Coalition. That doesn't change just because one human is gone, but even as he said it, he wasn't sure he believed it. The news spread through the galaxy like fire through dry grass. On commercial stations and mining colonies, on diplomatic outposts and research facilities, humans began the process of departure. They packed their belongings, said hurried goodbyes, and boarded ships heading back toward the Sol system. The reactions varied by species and circumstance. Some aliens expressed sadness and confusion. Others offered desperate incentives for humans to stay. The Del Sari Commonwealth promised generous salaries and full citizenship rights. The Meridian Collective offered entire planets for human settlement. A coalition of smaller species pooled their resources to offer treasure beyond measure. The humans refused everything. They moved with a strange urgency, as if compelled by something beyond simple orders. Many looked haunted, their faces drawn with worry, but none of them explained why. When asked directly, they claimed not to know themselves. The recall order had come without justification, and Earth maintained absolute silence on its reasons. The Korthax Dominion watched the exodus with barely concealed satisfaction. War leader Korthax addressed his military council with triumph in his voice. The humans flee like frightened prey, he announced. This proves what we have always known. They are weak, and the galaxy has been foolish to elevate them. When they are gone, the strong will rise to their proper place. Should we accelerate our expansion plans? One of his generals asked. No, Korthax said thoughtfully. We wait until the last human has departed. Then we move. The galaxy will be in chaos, confused and leaderless. They will fall before us like grain before the harvester. On Unity Prime, Helen Garcia spent her final hours attempting to secure the agreements she'd been working on. She met with delegates from 17 different species, trying to create frameworks that would survive without human oversight. Most of the meetings ended with alien representatives begging her to find a way to stay. I can't, she told each of them. I'm sorry, but this is beyond my control. On her last night at Unity Prime, she stood in the observation deck and watched the nebula paint the darkness with ribbons of color. Vreeth found her there, standing alone. I wanted to say goodbye properly, he said, and to thank you for everything humans have done for the galaxy. We didn't do it alone, Helen said. Every achievement was a partnership. Yes, but humans were the catalyst. You showed us we could be more than our base instincts, more than our ancient feuds and territorial ambitions. Vreeth's skin shifted to a deep blue, the Quellan color of profound sadness. I fear we will forget those lessons quickly. Helen wanted to argue, to insist that the galaxy would be fine. But she had seen the reports already coming in. Border disputes that humans had mediated were already heating up again. Trade agreements were being questioned. Species that had worked together peacefully for decades were suddenly remembering old grievances. Then don't forget, she said finally. When things get difficult, remember what we built together. Remember that cooperation is always stronger than conflict. I will try, Vreeth promised, but humans made it look easy. I suspect it will be much harder than you made it seem. Captain Lisa Monroe commanded the passenger liner Horizon's Call, one of the last ships scheduled to leave Coalition space. She stood on the bridge, watching as the final human passengers boarded. Nearly 30,000 people, all heading back to Earth. The ship was designed to carry 20,000 comfortably, but they would make it work. All passengers accounted for, Captain, her first officer reported. We are cleared for departure. Lisa looked at the view screen, at Unity Prime growing smaller as they pulled away. She had lived on that station for 20 years. She'd gotten married there, celebrated birthdays, made friends from 100 different worlds. Now she was leaving it all behind, and she didn't even know why. Take us out, she ordered. Best speed to Earth. The Horizon's Call turned away from Unity Prime and accelerated toward the border of Coalition space. Behind them, the galaxy watched with growing anxiety as humanity vanished from their midst. As Lisa's ship approached the Sol system, she saw something that made her breath catch. A barrier of energy surrounded Earth's entire solar system, a shimmering wall that stretched across billions of kilometers of space. It had always been there, established when humans first joined the Coalition, but no one had ever explained its purpose. Humans came and went through designated checkpoints, but the barrier itself remained a mystery. Now, as the Horizon's call passed through, Lisa saw the barrier intensify behind them. It grew brighter, denser, more solid. By the time they reached Earth orbit, the barrier had become completely opaque. The galaxy could no longer see in. And humanity could no longer see out. Whatever had called them home, whatever waited in the darkness of space, humans would face it alone. The galaxy would have to survive without them. The question was whether either would manage. 6 months after the last human ship disappeared behind Earth's barrier, the galaxy began to tear itself apart. The first crisis erupted exactly where Helen Garcia had predicted. The Thrixian Empire and the Delsari Commonwealth had maintained an uneasy truce over the Talos sector for exactly 19 days after her departure. Then, a Thrixian mining vessel strayed 3 kilometers into disputed space. The Delsari destroyed it without warning. The Thrixians retaliated by bombarding a Delsari processing station. Within a week, both sides had mobilized their fleets. Ambassador Vreth stood in the council chamber of Unity Prime, addressing the same representatives that Helen had mediated between just months earlier. His 4 arms gestured desperately as he tried to employ the techniques he'd watched humans use for years. Both sides have legitimate concerns, Vreth said, his voice steady despite the anxiety coursing through him. High Counselor Thrixka, your people lost 17 miners in the attack. Speaker Delzamir, your station housed 200 workers. These losses are tragic, but more violence will only create more grief. The time for words has passed. Thrixa clicked, his mandibles snapping with barely controlled rage. The Delsari attacked without provocation. Delsamir's water sphere bubbled violently. Provocation? Your vessel violated our territory. We defended what is ours. Please, Vreth said, stepping between them as he'd seen Helen do countless times. Let us find a solution that honors both your losses and prevents future bloodshed. Perhaps a neutral zone, monitored by coalition forces, where neither side operates without mutual consent. We do not need a neutral zone, Thrixka said coldly.
We need justice.
Justice or revenge? Vraith asked, borrowing words he'd heard Helen use. The Thrixian ambassador stood abruptly, his chitinous body rigid with anger. I see now why the humans left. They grew tired of coddling those too weak to defend their own interests. The Thrixian Empire withdraws from these proceedings. We will settle this matter through strength, as our ancestors did before humans made us soft. The Thrixian delegation walked out of the chamber. Delzamir's bioluminescence shifted to deep crimson, the color of war determination. Within hours, the Delsari Commonwealth issued a formal declaration of conflict. Vreeth remained in the empty chamber long after both sides had departed, his skin faded to the pale gray of failure. He had used Helen's words, copied her techniques, tried to inspire the same cooperation she had made seem effortless. None of it had worked. He wondered if humans possessed some quality that simply could not be learned, some fundamental difference that made them natural peacemakers. He didn't realize the truth yet. It wasn't that humans were fundamentally different. It was that the galaxy had never truly learned to make peace on their own. They had simply borrowed human peace, letting humans carry the weight of their better nature. Without that external pressure, they were reverting to what felt natural and easy, to old patterns of conflict and dominance. The Thrixian-Delsari War became the spark that ignited a dozen other conflicts. Border disputes that humans had mediated for decades suddenly erupted into armed skirmishes. Species that had cooperated peacefully for generations remembered ancient grudges. Trade routes became contested territory. Research collaborations dissolved into accusations of stolen technology. On Unity Prime itself, the situation deteriorated rapidly. The station had always been a symbol of cooperation, a place where every species worked together. Without human presence, it became a prize to be claimed. 3 different species laid claim to administrative control. Security forces from different worlds refused to take orders from each other. Minor disagreements escalated into violent confrontations. In the medical bay where Danny Cooper had once launched rescue missions, the new pilot struggled with her first emergency call. Commander Zephyra was a skilled Meridian aviator with decades of experience, but the rescue procedures that Danny had developed relied on split-second coordination and trust that took years to build. We have a mining accident in the Corvin Belt, Creek reported, his crystalline form flickering with stress. 47 miners trapped in a collapsed tunnel, oxygen running out in 90 minutes. Zephyra studied the navigation data carefully. The asteroid was deep in a debris field, surrounded by unstable rocks that shifted unpredictably. Danny would have already launched, trusting his instincts and his crew's ability to adapt. Zephyra hesitated. The approach is too dangerous, she decided. We need to wait for the debris to stabilize. That could take hours, Yelosa protested. The miners will be dead. Better than risking this entire crew on a suicide run, Zephyr replied. Kreeth looked at the empty pilot's chair where Danny used to sit, the human who would have found a way through impossible odds. Lieutenant Cooper would have tried. Lieutenant Cooper is gone, Zephyr said flatly. We must work with reality, not nostalgia. By the time conditions were safe enough for Zephyr to attempt the rescue, 31 miners had died from oxygen deprivation. The survivors were rescued, but the swift response crew felt the weight of those deaths. They had the same ship, the same equipment, even the same training. But something essential was missing. The willingness to risk everything for strangers, the creative desperation that found solutions where none seemed to exist, the absolute refusal to accept that anyone was beyond saving. Those were human qualities, and the crew couldn't simply manufacture them by wanting them badly enough. Across the galaxy, similar failures multiplied. Scientific expeditions that humans had led fell apart when researchers from different species couldn't bridge their methodological differences. Humanitarian missions to refugee populations stalled when organizers spent more time arguing about jurisdiction than helping people. Even simple things became complicated. Humans had served as translators not just of language but of culture, explaining why one species found another's behavior offensive and finding compromises that let everyone save face. The Korthax Dominion watched the chaos with predatory satisfaction. War leader Korthax had spent 6 months preparing for this moment, quietly moving military assets into position while the rest of the galaxy tore itself apart over petty disputes. The time has come, he announced to his war council. The galaxy is weak and divided. They fight among themselves like scavengers over scraps. We will remind them what true strength looks like. The Korthax launched their expansion with brutal efficiency. They hit 3 border systems simultaneously, overwhelming defenses that had been weakened by months of neglect and budget disputes. Species that might have come to each other's aid were too busy with their own conflicts to respond. Within 2 weeks, the Korthax had seized control of 7 star systems, displacing millions of civilians. The Coalition Parliament called an emergency session to address the Korthax aggression. It was chaos from the first moment. Representatives screamed accusations at each other, each claiming their own crisis was more urgent. The Thrixians demanded support against the Delsari. The Delsari demanded justice for Thrixian attacks. A dozen other species presented their own grievances, their own enemies, their own desperate needs. Vreth tried to restore order, pounding his speaking staff against the floor until it cracked. Please, we face a common threat. The Korthax will not stop at 7 systems. They will keep expanding until someone stops them. We must unite. Unite? Thresis clicked with bitter laughter. The way the humans taught us to unite? Where did that leave us? Weak and unprepared. The Korthax are right about one thing. Strength is the only currency that matters. Other voices joined in agreement. Species that had once praised human ideals of cooperation now denounced them as naive fantasies. The galaxy was reverting to an older, harder philosophy. Might makes right. Take what you can defend. Trust no one. Vreth watched the parliament descend into shouting and threats. He had studied human diplomatic techniques for years, learned their methods, memorized their approaches, but he finally understood the truth. Humans hadn't just taught techniques, they had embodied principles. They had shown by constant example that compassion was stronger than cruelty, that cooperation achieved more than domination, that the greatest power came from lifting others up rather than pushing them down. The galaxy had watched humans demonstrate these truths every single day, but they had never truly internalized them. They had relied on humans to be good, so they didn't have to be. And now that humans were gone, they were discovering how hard it was to choose the better path without someone constantly showing them the way. As the parliament session dissolved into violence, with 3 representatives actually coming to blows on the chamber floor, Vreth made a decision. He left Unity Prime and headed for the Sol system, for the impenetrable barrier that surrounded Earth. He would go there with a delegation of other species, the ones who still remembered what humans had taught them.
They would beg humanity to return. The galaxy was dying without them.
And Vreth suspected they had very little time left to save it. 2 years had passed since the humans vanished behind Earth's barrier. The galaxy Vreth remembered no longer existed. He stood on the bridge of a civilian transport, one of 20 ships carrying delegates from across Coalition space. They had come together despite their differences, united by desperation. Through the viewport, he could see the shimmering wall that surrounded the Sol system, an opaque barrier of energy that revealed nothing of what lay beyond. Broadcasting on all frequencies, the communications officer announced. She was a young Delsari named Mirasol, one of the few who still believed cooperation could solve their problems. No response from Earth. Vreth moved to the communications console and activated the transmitter himself. His four hands trembled slightly as he spoke into the void. "People of Earth, this is Ambassador Vreth of the Quellan Unity, speaking on behalf of the Galactic Coalition. We come in peace and in desperation. The galaxy is tearing itself apart. We need your help. We need your wisdom. Please, if you can hear us, respond." Silence answered him. The barrier remained impenetrable, revealing nothing. Behind Vreth, delegates from 17 different species waited anxiously. Speaker Delsimir was there, his water sphere dimmed by exhaustion. Even High Counselor Thrixka had joined them, his proud chitinous armor scarred from battles with the Korthax. Former enemies stood side by side, brought together by catastrophe. Try again," Delsimir urged. "They must hear us." Reith broadcast the same message again and again. For 3 days, the delegation ships remained at the barrier, sending pleas into the silence. They detailed the wars consuming the galaxy, the Korthax expansion that had claimed 23 systems, the refugee crisis that had displaced billions, the collapse of trade networks and scientific cooperation. They confessed their failures, admitted their weakness, begged forgiveness for taking human help for granted. Earth remained silent. On the 4th day, a young Thrixian scientist named Chikthar made a discovery that changed everything. She had been reviewing old human records stored in Unity Prime's archives, searching for anything that might explain the recall order. Most human files had been deleted or taken when they departed, but some administrative records remained, overlooked in the chaos. Chikthar's antennae quivered with excitement as she studied data from Earth's deep space monitoring network. Humans had maintained sensor arrays far beyond Coalition space, pointed outward into the void between galaxies. The records showed unusual readings beginning approximately 3 years ago, shortly before the recall order. Massive energy signatures, movement patterns, something huge approaching from the darkness beyond known space. They were watching for something. Chikthar transmitted to Vreth's ship. "The humans didn't leave us. They left to prepare for a threat we never knew existed." Vreth felt his skin shift through a dozen colors as understanding dawned. The quarantine barrier around Earth, established when humans first joined the Coalition 150 years ago, it had never been about protecting the galaxy from humans. It was a defensive fortification, a last line of protection against something coming from outside. "Send this data to every Coalition world," Vreth ordered. "Immediately." The information spread across the galaxy like lightning. Scientists analyzed the old human sensor data, comparing it with current readings. What they found terrified them. The anomalies the humans had detected 3 years ago were closer now, much closer. And they were massive. Thousands of objects, each the size of a small moon, moving in perfect formation toward Coalition space. Whatever they were moving with purpose and intelligence. The Coalition's best scientists worked frantically to understand what approached. A Meridian astrophysicist named Kel Van made the breakthrough. He compared the energy signatures with ancient records, stories passed down through generations, myths that most species had dismissed as primitive superstition. "The Void Collective," Kelvin announced during an emergency broadcast to the entire galaxy. "Our ancestors spoke of machines that came from the darkness between galaxies. Artificial intelligence so old that no one remembers who built them. They consumed entire civilizations, harvesting biological matter for purposes we never understood. The story said they came every 10,000 years, and each time they left nothing behind." "Stories aren't evidence," someone protested. "The energy signatures match," Kelvin insisted. "And the timing is right. It has been nearly 10,000 years since the last recorded encounter." Panic spread through Coalition space. Some species retreated to their homeworlds, preparing isolated defenses. Others tried to flee beyond the approaching threat, though there was nowhere to run that the Void Collective couldn't eventually reach. A few brave worlds attempted to unite their military forces, but years of conflict had left their fleets weakened and their cooperation skills atrophied. The Korthax Dominion, confident in their military strength, sent a battle fleet to intercept the approaching objects. War leader Korthax commanded the expedition personally, eager to prove that Korthax's strength could defeat any threat. His fleet encountered the Void Collective at the edge of the Tertian sector. 300 warships, the pride of Korthax military engineering, faced down 5 of the enormous objects moving through space. The battle lasted 17 minutes. The Void Collective machines moved with impossible precision, their weapons cutting through Korthax shields as if they didn't exist. They adapted to every tactic, countered every strategy. Korthax watched in horror as his ships were systematically destroyed, his warriors slaughtered despite their strength and courage. His flagship was the last to fall. As the hull breached and his crew died around him, Korthak managed to send a final transmission back to Coalition space. "We were wrong," he said, his voice weak from wounds that would soon kill him. "Strength alone is not enough. The Void Collective is beyond anything we can fight. If humanity has a plan, the galaxy needs it now. Pride means nothing if we are all dead." The transmission ended as his ship exploded. The loss of the Korthax fleet sent shockwaves through the galaxy. If the strongest warriors in Coalition space couldn't slow the Void Collective, what hope did anyone else have? Projections showed the machines reaching the core Coalition worlds within 6 months. Billions would die, entire civilizations would be erased. At the barrier around Earth, Vrieth's delegation continued broadcasting their pleas. Now they had new information to share. The Void Collective was coming. Humanity's preparation time had run out. "We understand now why you left," Vrieth transmitted. "You saw this coming and tried to prepare. But you cannot face this threat alone. The galaxy needs you. We are broken and weak, we admit this. We failed to learn the lessons you taught us. But please, don't let our failures doom billions of innocent people. If you have weapons, if you have a plan, we are begging you to share it." For the first time in 2 years, the barrier around Earth responded. It didn't open, not yet. But a signal came through, a simple message in hundreds of languages. "We hear you." "We are coming. Hold on." Across Coalition space, the message was received. Some species felt hope kindle in their hearts for the first time in months. Others remained skeptical. How could humanity have prepared for something this massive in only 2 years? Vrieth stared at the barrier, watching for any sign of change. Around him, his delegation held their breath. The galaxy was dying, consumed by war and threatened by machines older than civilization itself. Everything now depended on what emerged from behind that shimmering wall. The question was whether humanity had prepared enough, or whether their isolation had doomed both themselves and the galaxy they had left behind. Within days, they would all know the answer. The barrier began to flicker, like a light preparing to go out. Something was coming through. The barrier around Earth collapsed in a cascade of fading light, revealing what lay beyond for the first time in 2 years. Vreth's entire delegation stared in stunned silence at what emerged from the Sol system. Ships. Hundreds of them. Thousands. Human vessels of designs the galaxy had never seen, sleek and powerful, bristling with weapons that hummed with barely contained energy. At the center of the fleet, a massive dreadnought led the formation, its hull painted with the letters EDS Defender. "This is Admiral Kevin Wright of the Earth Defense Fleet." A voice crackled across all frequencies. "Delegation ships, maintain your position. We're heading to engage the Void Collective. We'll talk after we deal with the immediate threat." The human fleet swept past Vreth's delegation like a silver river flowing through space. Vrieth counted over 3,000 ships, each one built with technology that seemed decades ahead of anything the Coalition possessed. Where had humans found the resources? The time? 2 years seemed impossible for this scale of construction. On the bridge of the Defender, Admiral Kevin Wright studied tactical displays that showed the Void Collective's approach vector. He was a tall man with gray hair and eyes that had seen too many simulations of galactic extinction. For 2 years, Earth had lived with a single purpose: preparing for this moment. All ships, this is right. Battle Plan Alpha 7. We hit them hard at the Meridian Crossroads. Buy time for Coalition evacuation. Remember your training. These machines are old and smart, but they've never fought humans before. That's our advantage. His tactical officer, Commander Nina Price, pulled up sensor data on the approaching Void Collective. "Sir, we're reading 47 major units, each 1-3 kilometers across. Estimated smaller drones in the hundreds of thousands. This is larger than our worst projections." "Then we adapt," Kevin said calmly. "That's what we do." Across the fleet, human crews prepared for battle with quiet efficiency. These weren't the same people who had left Coalition space 2 years ago. They had spent every waking hour training, building, preparing for an enemy that had destroyed civilizations for 10,000 years. They knew the odds. They knew many of them wouldn't survive. But they also knew that if they failed, everything ended. On one of the smaller ships, the rapid assault cruiser Swift Justice, Lieutenant Danny Cooper sat in the pilot's seat and felt like he'd come home. The ship was faster and more maneuverable than anything he'd flown before, built specifically for rescue operations in combat zones. His crew was entirely human this time, but he missed the mix of species he'd worked with on Unity Prime. "Danny, you seeing these numbers?" his co-pilot Eric Lane asked nervously. "We're outnumbered about 200 to 1. "Yeah, but they don't know how stubborn humans can be," Danny replied with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Besides, we've got something they don't." "What's that?" "A really good reason to fight. Everyone back in Coalition space counting on us. Can't let them down." The human fleet reached the Meridian Crossroads, a region of space where 3 major trade routes converged. It was the last defensible position before the Void Collective entered heavily populated systems. Behind the human lines, Coalition ships struggled to evacuate civilian populations from threatened worlds. The Void Collective arrived like a swarm of metal locusts. The massive motherships moved with geometric precision, surrounded by clouds of smaller drones that numbered in the millions. Their weapons powered up with an eerie silence, energy building to devastating levels. "All ships engage!" Kevin ordered. The human fleet opened fire with coordinated precision. New weapons developed in Earth's 2 years of isolation tore into the Void Collective formation. Pulse cannons that disrupted machine logic, electromagnetic mines that scrambled drone communications, kinetic missiles that hit with the force of small asteroids. The Void Collective adapted quickly, just as the ancient records predicted. Shields reconfigured to block new weapon frequencies, drones reorganized into defensive formations. But humans adapted too, changing tactics every few minutes, never letting the machines predict their next move. Danny piloted the Swift Justice through waves of enemy drones, his ship dancing between laser fire that could vaporize him in an instant. His mission was simple: protect the evacuation transports fleeing nearby colonies. When 3 Void Collective drones broke through the human line and headed for a refugee ship carrying 20,000 Quellan civilians, Danny didn't hesitate. "Eric, divert all power to engines. We're going after them." The Swift Justice accelerated beyond its design limits, overtaking the drones before they could reach the transport. Danny positioned his ship directly in their path, using his vessel as a shield while firing everything he had. 2 drones exploded. The third one damaged his starboard engine before Eric managed to destroy it with a desperate shot. "Hull breach on decks 3 and 4, Eric reported. "We're venting atmosphere. Seal it off." "We've got more work to do," Danny said, turning the crippled ship back toward the battle line. Across the battlefield, similar acts of courage multiplied. Human crews sacrificed their ships to protect Coalition vessels. Captains rammed damaged cruisers into Void Collective motherships to create openings for coordinated strikes. Engineers stayed in damaged engine rooms to keep weapons firing, knowing they'd die when the hulls finally gave out. The battle raged for 18 hours. The human fleet slowly pushed the Void Collective back, but the cost was staggering. Over 800 human ships were destroyed. Thousands of crew members killed, but the evacuation continued behind them. Millions of civilians fleeing to safety while humans bought them time with blood and metal. On the Defender's bridge, Kevin watched his tactical display with growing concern. They were winning, but barely. And this was just the first wave. Sensors showed more Void Collective forces approaching from deeper space. Then something unexpected happened. Coalition ships began entering the battle zone, not fleeing. Led by Wraith's transport and the delegation that had been waiting at Earth's barrier, vessels from dozens of species moved into formation alongside the human fleet. "This is Ambassador Wraith to Admiral Wright. We cannot let humans fight alone. The Korthax showed us that strength without cooperation fails. You have bought us time. You have shown us courage. Now let us show you that we learned something in your absence." Kevin felt something tight in his chest loosen slightly. "All Coalition vessels, welcome to the party. Transmitting tactical data now. Let's show these machines what the galaxy can do together." The combined fleet fought with renewed energy. Meridian ships used their speed to draw drone fire, while Thrixian heavy cruisers hammered motherships with sustained bombardment. Del Sari vessels, designed for underwater combat, proved surprisingly effective at close-quarters fighting in the debris fields created by destroyed ships. Quellan commanders coordinated evacuation routes with human rescue ships. It wasn't perfect. Communication delays caused friendly fire incidents. Different species had different tactical philosophies that sometimes conflicted, but they made it work because the alternative was extinction. The turning point came when a Thrixian science vessel shared a critical discovery with the human fleet. The Void Collective motherships had a central processing core that coordinated all the drones in their sector. Destroy the core, and thousands of drones would go dormant. Kevin immediately restructured his battle plan. "All ships, new priority targets. We're going for the brains of this operation." Coordinated strikes from human and coalition forces focused on the mothership cores. It was incredibly dangerous work. The cores were buried deep inside the massive vessels, protected by layers of armor and defensive drones. Ships had to penetrate deep into enemy formations, survive long enough to fire on the cores, then escape before they were overwhelmed. Danny volunteered the Swift Justice for one of these runs, despite his damaged ship. He led a strike team of 5 vessels, 3 human and 2 Delsari, into the heart of a mothership formation. They lost one ship on approach and another during the attack run, but they reached the core and destroyed it with concentrated fire. The effect was immediate. Over 15,000 Void Collective drones went dark, floating helplessly in space. Across the battlefield, similar strikes achieved similar results. The tide was turning. After 36 hours of continuous combat, the Void Collective began to withdraw. The remaining motherships retreated beyond Coalition space, pulling back into the darkness between galaxies. They had never faced resistance like this before. Never encountered species willing to die for strangers, never experienced the power of cooperation across hundreds of different civilizations. On the Defender's Bridge, Kevin allowed himself a moment of relief before reality set in. This was just a probe. They'll be back with more forces. We hurt them, but we didn't stop them. Vreth's face appeared on his communication screen. All 4 of his arms spread wide in a Quellan gesture of gratitude. But you showed us we can fight them. Humans alone could not have won. Coalition alone would have been destroyed. Together, we have a chance. Kevin nodded slowly. Then we'd better start preparing together, because next time they won't underestimate us. Across Coalition space, a battered but hopeful galaxy began to rebuild. Humans didn't return to their old roles as mediators and peacekeepers. Instead, they became partners, teachers who learned as much as they taught, leaders who asked for input instead of assuming they had all the answers. The Thrixian-Delsari War ended within a week, both sides sobered by how close they'd come to extinction while fighting each other. The Korthax Dominion, humbled by their defeat and awed by human sacrifice, sued for peace and returned their conquered territories. Unity Prime was rebuilt as a true collaborative effort, with representatives from every species, including humans, working side by side. Helen Garcia returned to her diplomatic post, but now she worked with Vreth as co-ambassador, teaching him not just techniques but principles, while learning from his perspective. Danny Cooper resumed rescue operations, but with a mixed crew again. Kreeth had held his position open, refusing to accept a permanent replacement. Their first mission after the battle was recovering escape pods from destroyed ships, both human and alien, bringing survivors home regardless of species. The galaxy had learned a harsh lesson. Humanity's departure hadn't just changed everything. It had revealed the truth. Peace, cooperation, compassion, these things weren't uniquely human traits. But humans had modeled them so consistently that other species had never developed those muscles themselves. They had borrowed human strength instead of building their own. The price paid was terrible. Thousands of humans dead. Millions of aliens killed in the wars that followed humanity's departure. Entire worlds devastated by the Void Collective's attack. But from that price came understanding. The galaxy was stronger not because humans did everything for them, but because humans had finally shown them they could stand on their own while standing together. And when the Void Collective returned, as everyone knew they eventually would, the galaxy would be ready. Not as separate species depending on human protection, but as one united civilization that had learned the hardest way possible that their survival depended on each other. The barrier around Earth came down permanently. Humanity was home, not as saviors, but as equals, among friends who finally understood that the best of humanity had always been inside themselves as well. They just needed to be brave enough to find it.